All right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik ala nabiyyina wa habibina wa qurrati a'yunina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Wa ba'd. So today, inshallah ta'ala, we will start with reciting, or we'll continue reciting within the matan. There's only maybe this session and maybe next week, inshallah, we'll conclude reciting the session. I'll make sure there's a session for Q&A. For people if you want to ask specific questions about what's been taught in the course, or if there's anything that's unclear, to make sure that you're comfortable. We'll schedule exams sometime first week of September or second week, as we're going to start rolling out some of the new courses, inshallah ta'ala, soon. So we stopped, I think, I'm trying to remember what we... Yes, so we recited the first. So these verses of Matan Imam al-Tahawi they explain Aqeeda, but they don't do it in a categorized manner. Like early scholars of Islam, they didn't categorize the way they taught things for the most part. Like they never went, okay, here's the first Iman Billah and then talk about that. Iman Billah. No, this was done later. Early scholars, they just spoke. And I actually find it I like it more. I like to hold on to these authentic texts because they do that. Where Imam al-Tahawi is a great scholar of Islamic creed, and at the end of his life, he wrote this. It was almost as if he put together the zubda, like the summary of all of the knowledge that he had put together all these years, and he just spoke what made sense to him. He just said what he thought was the right way of understanding things, without necessarily going through topics in an organized manner, but more in a humane manner. And that's how the Quran kind of teaches things, and the scholars of Islam followed into those footsteps. Only recently did we start categorizing everything and make it. And there's nothing wrong with doing it either way. I'm just saying that this older or more authentic manner of teaching is where they just talk to you about what they believe. Sometimes repeating the same topic more than once from different angles, sometimes jumping from one topic to the other, depending on what where the connections lie within the discipline. But it's a different way of kind of conveying information. There's more of a humane flow to it, rather than a rigid academic approach. Sometimes the rigidity of the academic approach to things will suck out the life from the topic, from the discipline itself, and you will recognize this more as you in life as you go through academia, or if you are someone who is academically oriented and does a lot of that work, you'll find that the rigidity of the approaches, some academic approaches, will often deprive the speaker of flowing through, because there's a flow to understanding stuff. Like you arrive at certain beliefs or understandings or conclusions based on teachings or introductions that may exist in a different discipline, or may be a part of a different topic. But just allowing things to flow is more of how our brains actually work. So I want you to think about this. Like when you're a kid and you learned you learned in math, for example, how to مثلثات, what is trigonometry? I think that's what it's called. So when you study trigonometry as a kid, it's not a fun thing to study, right? It's very annoying. It's actually the funnest thing to study. But the way they teach it to us it has nothing to do with the teacher. The teacher could be an amazing teacher. It's the way it's taught. You see, the guy who figured this out didn't sit in a classroom and was taught the trigonometry of his time, and then he had to figure. He was a person who had a problem in front of him. He was a person who had a problem, who knew that there's a piece of land this big, and he had to figure out how to actually calculate the width or the breadth or the length of this piece of land without having someone go and take steps and do it, because it's impossible to do that. So he started thinking, are there ways to do this? We are not taught that way. We are given the formula, memorize the formula, apply the formula. The way to do this is why do you need this formula? Like, what exactly am I going? And you're given this little triangle, and you have to figure out. That's not how the guy who figured this out. That's not what he did. He didn't take a small little triangle. No, he had a life problem, He had an issue that he was struggling with. He couldn't seem to figure out a certain length of something, and he had all these other pieces. And he's like, I have these other pieces. I must be able to know this one. Like I must, if I know how long this one is and how long this one is, and I know the angle, there must be a way for me to figure this out instead of actually going and driving or running with a horse or whatever, or making there must be a way for me to figure this out. So they were challenged with problems and they offered solutions. Today, we are deprived from the intellectual stimulation of the problem up front. We're just given, here, memorize this, know this formula, apply it to this problem that we artificially made up for you on the piece of paper here, where you'll never need this. You'll never look at a triangle and stop your life and say, I need to know how long no one's going to do this. But and that's where we are deprived from the curiosity of science today, by just being given these formulas without knowing why this was ever important, why the guy who came up with this who lived a good life. They were happy because they were facing daily challenges, and they were figuring out ways to deal with it. And we don't have that. And a lot of what we do in Islamic studies is that's why I like to keep these authentic, old, original texts, because they're filled with life. I can hear Imam Tahawi speak to me, like speak from his time. Like we hear him talk about things that matter to him. You take a book, like I love Sheikh Abdul Rahman Hassan Haban al-Maidani and Sheikh Mustafa al-Khin and Muhyiddin Misju. I love these scholars. And they wrote really good books on Aqeeda, like covering everything. But there's no life in these books. They're categorized. First bab, just the points that you need to know, all the arguments, all the stuff. There's nothing in it. These mutun don't have that. He goes back and forth. Why? Because you get to hear him. You get to hear him deal and point out that if you understand the context of his time, actually, it becomes very meaningful. And I like that piece of it. And I think it's an important aspect, even though, you could easily argue that there's a better matan than Tahawiyya, in terms of how it's categorized. Like you'll find something. But this one, even though it's 1,000 years old, the information in it still stands. The end message is still correct. Yes, it's not perfectly categorized, but it's actually more lively. That's why I like reading. And I think it's important for you. Like basically all the information from the course you've learned already. These next two sections is just, I want to go through this text. And I think it's an important part of learning I'tiqad is at least once in your life reading this authentic, very well-established, past the test of time text that we should all be aware of. So we'll continue reading, inshallah ta'ala. We read this last week. And here he talked about the Prophet ﷺ. I offered you some commentary. This commentary is just for you as you read through the matan. So I'll put for you how he broke down, how these verses are broken down. So from 31 to 49, which is what we are reading, he'll talk about the final prophecy of the fact that the prophecy of the Prophet ﷺ is the final one, the universality of his prophecy ﷺ, the divineness of the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala regarding the issues of the Quran and Khalq al-Quran and all that stuff. He will talk about anthropomorphism and denying it. He'll talk about the issue of seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He will show you his approach to words that elude resemblance. Like he'll talk about how he approaches that specifically, radiallahu anhu here. And he'll talk about Iman bil Rusul. That's these verses that we're going to go through. These are the topics that he covers. But some of these topics he'll cover again later. But he'll just talk about them a little bit differently. Why? And because they're attached to a part of what he's trying to bring forward. So you find that there is some organization to this, but there's also a little bit of flexibility where he just talk about how he sees stuff. فيقول رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلمه وإن القرآن كلام الله منه بدا بلا كيفية قولا وأنزله على رسوله وحيا وصدقه المؤمنون على ذلك حقا وأيقنوا أنه كلام الله تعالى بالحقيقة ليس بمخلوق ككلام البرية فمن سمعه فزعم أنه كلام البشر فقد كفر وقد ذمه الله وعابه وأوعده بسقر حيث قال تعالى سأصليه سقر فلما أوعد الله بسقر لمن قال إن هذا إلا قول البشر علمنا وأيقنا أنه قول خالق البشر ولا يشبه قول البشر. So he says, rahmatullah alayh, and indeed the Quran is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without ascribing modality to his speech, as I kind of talked about. When we talk about his speech subhanahu wa ta'ala, I don't know. We don't know exactly how is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks. I know that it's not like me. I know that. I know that it's not a tongue and teeth and a vocal cords. I know that for sure, but I don't know how. And that's what he's pointing out here. And we continue to carry that as mu'mins. And all schools of thought, by the way, carry that. Like al-Athari, Salafi, Ash'ari, al-Maturidi, they all agree to this. There's no difference of opinion on that part. We all know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks and that Quran is his speech. We don't know how this has become through. Why? Because he is divine, subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we are not, and we accept that piece. He sent it down upon his messenger, or he revealed it to his messenger as revelation. The believers accept all of that as the truth. They are certain that this is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Almighty in reality. It is uncreated, unlike the speech of creatures. Laysa bi makhluq, meaning the Quran is not makhluq, and he points that piece out. And we talked about this in a separate slide, and we went into the whole story that occurred back at the Abbasi time when this fitna began, and Imam Ahmad and Imam Buwaitli and others who kind of held it down, that the Quran, and this is a tertiary piece of Aqeeda, really. Whether you accept it like this or elsewhere won't really affect your Iman in general, but this is Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. We see that Allah subhanahu speech is divine, that the Quran, the words that are being said from me are voices and sounds that are created, but the meanings that the Quran carry are not created. Whoever hears the Quran and imagines that it is human speech has committed unbelief. This is an issue of kufr. So not every sin or every disbelief or misbelief will cause you to leave Islam, for sure. But there are certain things that if you decide that you do not accept, or you are questioning, or you're not, then this is a hindrance between you and being Muslim. And one of them is the Quran. The Quran is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the mainstay of being Muslim. This is the cornerstone. If you decide that a part of the Quran is not the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you're no longer Muslim anymore. You're something else, but you're not Muslim. And this is important because there are Islam is a river. I've talked about this a number of times, but there are banks to this river. There are things that will get you outside of it. And one of them is the Quran. Every word in the Quran is the wahi that the Prophet ﷺ received from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, qawlan wahidan. There's no dispute on this matter, and there's no room for, if you have doubts, then you need to go learn about how the Quran was revealed and how the Quran was preserved and how it arrived at. That's all fine, but it's not something that at the end is, a hadith are not the same. A hadith can be debated whether this one is sahih or hasan or da'if. There's some, and if you decide not to accept a hadith sahih, it's a dhanb, but you're not a kafir. You're still Muslim. Like if you refute a hadith, it's a sin that is pointed out to you, and people should know about the fact that you are refuting something that with no evidence to refute it, or you're refusing something without the proper academic or scientific or Islamic or lawful argument to push it back. But you don't leave Islam for doing it. The Quran, on the other hand, if you recite an ayah and say that's not, Allah didn't say that, that's an act of disbelief or unbelief, meaning this is an act of kufr. However, if you accept that the words in the Quran are Allah's, but you interpret them differently, you don't perform kufr. That's maybe fisq, but not kufr. For example, if you speak to someone and they walk in and say, khamr is not haram, right? So the question becomes the following for me. Like I have to ask these questions because I have to figure out what. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, innama al-khamru wal-maysiru wal-ansabu wal-azlamu rijsun min amali ash-shaytani fajtanibuhu la'allakum tuflihun. So if he tells me Allah didn't say that, he's no longer Muslim. If he tells me Allah said that, but that's not what it means, he is Muslim. He is in trouble. He is in trouble because this is a fisq, this is an act of sin where you decide to interpret ala kayfak, though he doesn't mean that, or he's not serious about it. That's all. You're still Muslim. You're in trouble. You've committed a big problem by saying that, but you're still Muslim. But it's when you say that that's not in the Quran, that's not, Allah didn't say that. I say Allah said, innama al-khamru wal-maysir wal-ansab. He said that. No, he didn't. That ayah was fabricated, added by someone. You're not Muslim anymore. You accept that's an ayah of the Quran, but you decide to interpret it ala kayfak however you want, you're still Muslim. It's a problem. It's a big problem. I have to address it. And I have to also make sure you're not teaching people. Like I have to make sure that I protect others from what it is you're saying. However, you don't leave Islam by doing that. Understand the difference here? So I have to ask the question all the time. Explain to me why. Like based on what are you saying this? I have to listen. Other people get upset. I have to hear. I have to hear what he's saying. It's my job. I have to see what is the basis of this argument. some bases of the argument. Sometimes you have a basis that is I don't agree with, but I can't necessarily fault you for taking it. Others, I can say your argument is wrong. You believe it, but you're wrong, and that has to be pointed out if you decide to go and spread this. Others are like you left Islam by doing that. And that's our job, to be very clear. So everything in the Quran is the Quran. If anyone imagines that is human speech, any aspect of it, then that is an act of disbelief. It's not of kufr. It's an important part for you as a Muslim to know that. It's like you need to know what causes kufr. Not so that you can point people out. It's for your own sake. So you know that, so you don't get close, you stay far away from those boundaries, right? Allah has blamed him, censored him, and threatened him with punishment, wherein the Almighty says, I will burn him in saqar, or the flaming fire. When Allah threatens with the fire, those who said this is only human speech, and He is referring here to the verses in Surah Al-Muddathir, when He said, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was quoting one of the mushrikeen, most likely Al-Walid al-Mughira, but إِنَّهُ فَكَّرَ وَقَدَّرَ فَقُتِلَ كَيْفَ قَدَّرَ ثُمَّ نَظَرَ ثُمَّ عَبَسَ وَبَسَرَ ثُمَّ أَدْبَرَ وَاسْتَكْبَرَ فَقَالَ إِنْ هَذَا إِلَّا سِحْرٌ يُؤْثَرُ إِنْ هَذَا إِلَّا قَوْلُ الْبَشَرِ. This is only the words of a human. So Uslihi Saqar was the answer. So the Imam is saying, if that's how the Quran is saying, then the Quran is being very clear to us that if you decide to call the Quran the word of a human being, then the punishment is fire, and that means this is an act of kufr. And that's how he kind of breaks this down legally. We know that with certainty that this is the speech of the creator of humanity, does not resemble the speech of humanity. يقول ومن وصف الله بمعنى من معاني البشر فقد كفر من أبصر هذا اعتبر وعن مثل قول الكفار انزجر وعلم أن الله بصفاته ليس كالبشر والرؤية حق لأهل الجنة بغير إحاطة ولا كيفية كما نطق به كتاب ربنا وجوه يومئذ ناظرة إلى ربها ناظرة وتفسيره على ما أراد الله تعالى وعلمه. So he says, rahmatullah alayh, whoever describes Allah with qualities of human beings, the same qualities of human beings, has committed kufr. He's pointing out things that will cause you to, if you describe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the same quality of a human being, then that's an act of kufr. Whoever grasps this will be careful and restrained from the likes of what is said by the unbelievers. He knows that attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are unlike those of human beings. And this is one of the most important statements in this in this matan, because it is the basis for all of the schools of theology within Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. All of the schools, Athari, Ash'ari, Maturidi, all agree to this without details, difference of details. They all agree that you cannot at any point perform anthropomorphism. You cannot claim that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is similar to His creation, nor that His creation at any point are similar to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Doing that is an act of kufr. So when they say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can have children, or He has a spouse, or He is flesh and blood, or He eats, or He drinks, or He sleeps, or He gets tired, He gets frustrated, He gets upset, and you are making that similar to human beings, that's an act of kufr. So when we speak of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're very careful. That's what He said here. If you understand this, then you will restrain yourself. You grasp it, then you'll be very careful of what you say about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because disbelievers don't care. When they speak of God, they speak of Him very differently. And you'll see this, like you'll run into people like that in your life who are not Muslim or of a different faith, or maybe not, and they speak of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with a certain degree of looseness that you have to be very weary of as a Muslim, because you're not speaking of a person or a flawed creation like yourself. You're speaking of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So be very careful of how you describe Him. And all of the difference of opinion that exists between these schools of thought that we have covered in this course. And we haven't covered all of them. I covered the things that I think you should definitely know as a Muslim living in the 21st century, are just because every group is trying their best to exalt Allah and to make sure that they don't say anything that makes Him similar to His creation. They just took different avenues to get there, and they had different approaches to it, and people differ on approaches. Make sure that in your life you don't set up animosities or find yourself standing on the opposite side of a track from someone who agrees with you on concept, agrees with you on principle, agrees with you on the ethic and the value, but differs with you on the approach. Doing that is the biggest waste of time in your life. It's a big waste for you to end up putting yourself in opposition to someone who agrees with you on principle. on the value, but just differs on how they're going to get there. Because we're always going to differ on the how. We're always going to differ on how to get to places. It's almost impossible that we don't. Put yourself on the opposite track of those who disagree with you principally. Like on principle, they disagree. They don't agree that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is exalted. They don't believe in God, or they don't accept that God is divine. That's someone that you are, and you have to understand that there's a big difference here between the two of us, and I have to be wary of it. But someone who doesn't, they just approach it differently. I think it's a big mistake. The vision of the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Jannah is true, without being all-encompassing and without modality, meaning we don't say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to be a picture that you can encompass with your eye. We don't say that. And we don't say modality. We don't, because the eye has a field of vision. Will I be able to encompass Allah in my field of vision? We don't say that. We don't say that because that is limiting of Allah. It's restricting of Allah. It's putting him in space. It's making me. So we don't say that. We don't give modality at all. Bila kayfiyya. That's what we say. Bila بغير إحاطة ولا كيفية. As expressed in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Qiyamah, faces on that day will be radiant, looking at their Lord. The explanation of this is as Allah Almighty intended and knows. That's how we explain it. How do you see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on Qiyamah? However Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows we will see him, and however Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intends for us to see him. And that's it. But we accept that he says, إِلَىٰ رَبِّهَا نَاظِرَةً, that the eyes, the faces, or the people on that day will be looking at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They'll be radiant because they're looking at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How? And that's left to him. Because he's divine and we are not, and we don't understand it. It's the same topic, wallahi. Like, Aqeeda is not that complicated. If you try to break down philosophically or logically the attributes of divinity, of divineness, and try to understand it within our realm, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to say stuff that make no sense, and you're going to end up putting. And he's going to say this, rahmatullah alayhi, in this matan, in a verse that I'm going to highlight for you and ask you to memorize and make dua against you if you don't. No, I won't. I will, but I will. وكل ما جاء في ذلك من الحديث الصحيح عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم فهو كما قال ومعناه على ما أراد لا ندخل في ذلك متأولين بآرائنا ولا متوهمين بأهوائنا فإنه ما سلم في دينه إلا من سلم لله عز وجل ولرسوله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم ورد علم ما اشتبه عليه إلى عالمه ولا تثبت قدم الإسلام إلا على ظهر التسليم Islam. So these are very powerful verses in the matan, because everything that has come in the authentic narrations of the Prophet ﷺ is as he said, and it means whatever he intended it to mean. So this is the first type of tafweed that we talked about. If you remember the three methods of dealing with words or actions that elude resemblance. I know there's three approaches. The first approach is this one here that he is pointing out. Or it's either the first approach or the second. Which one he doesn't exactly point out. If you remember the first two approaches, either you do tafweed, meaning you leave the matter in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you accept it as is, but do you affirm the apparent meaning of the word, or do you defer the apparent meaning of the word? I mean, do you affirm that wajh is wajh as we understand it, or do you say, I don't know what it means? He doesn't point this out here. Like the Imam does not actually say which one he does. We don't know for sure. We just know that he holds on to the first, to one of the first two, meaning as he means it, has the intent. However, we do not insert our own opinions in it, nor do we imagine it according to our whims. So when he says here, لا ندخل في ذلك متأولين. So you see the متأولين. Remember, one of the third method of dealing with these words is ta'wil. So you say, well, the Imam here is saying we don't do ta'wil. No, what he said was we don't enter متأولين بآرائنا. We don't enter with doing ta'wil based on our whims or based on our opinions on the matter. And the ulama who did ta'wil didn't do ta'wil based on their opinions or their whims. They did ta'wil based on ilm, based on knowledge, based on understanding of things, based on qara'in. There were supporting pieces of evidence that they used to perform this ta'wil. So his issue, which is correct, and this is a very important statement, that you don't do ta'wil based on your whims, based on your opinions. You don't imagine things however you want to. You don't make an image of God based on what suits you. Right? We don't make the image of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to suit us. We have to understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as He wants us to understand Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's what he explained here. For none is safe in his religion except those who surrender themselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to His messenger and relinquishes the knowledge of what is ambiguous to the one who knows it. So something that you don't understand well, something you don't comprehend. This is the tafwid. This is how at that time they performed tafwid. And he says it very clearly that we do not knowledge of something we don't understand, we surrender. We give that knowledge to the one who knows it. Who knows it? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So He knows what He meant by the things that He said, so we accept that, and no questions asked. As I explained to you before, that once Muslims entered from different cultures and different backgrounds and different languages, they had more questions. And this was not easy for them. They couldn't just say, okay, we accept and they had no knowledge of the Arabic language to begin with. So they had to ask questions. So the scholars had to offer answers that they could understand. And that is not only is that natural, it is obligatory. They have to do that. They can't say you accept this, no answers, no questions asked. No, there's going to be questions asked. But that was the method that he lived by, and a lot of the scholars at that time lived by as well. The foundation of one's Islam is not firm unless it is upon outward submission and surrender to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that is obviously fully agreed upon. It's ظهر التسليم والاستسلام. So what Islam means, where you submit and you surrender and you accept that from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without doubt. فَمَنْ رَامَ This is where I want you to take a moment and listen clearly, because it's an important piece. فَمَنْ رَامَ عِلْمَ مَا حُضِرَ عَنْهُ عِلْمُهُ وَلَمْ يَقْنَعْ بِالتَّسْلِيمِ فَهْمُهُ حَجَبَهُ مَرَامُهُ عَنْ خَالِصِ التَّوْحِيدِ وَصَافِ الْمَعْرِفَةِ وَصَحِيحِ الْإِيمَانِ فَيَتَذَبْذَبُ بَيْنَ الْكُفْرِ وَالْإِيمَانِ وَالتَّصْدِيقِ وَالتَّكْذِيبِ وَالْإِقْرَارِ وَالْإِنْكَارِ موسوسا تائها شاكا زائغا لا مؤمنا مصدقا ولا جاحدا مكذبا. So he points out something here that I think is really important, and this is why I like these authentic texts, because you wouldn't find this in a book of categorized theology studies. He says, if whoever wishes to know what is forbidden, or that is not forbidden but is not knowable, the word forbidden is probably a bad translation. حُضِرَ عَنْهُ عِلْمُهُ فَمَنْ رَامَ عِلْمَ مَا حُضِرَ عَنْهُ عِلْمُهُ. The person who wants to learn something that the knowledge of it was held back from him. He was deprived of it. You don't have access to that that knowledge. If you do that and is not satisfied, وَلَمْ يَقْنَعْ بِالتَّسْلِيمِ فَهْمُ, and he's not satisfied with surrendering to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his understanding will be veiled from pure monotheism, gnosis, and sound faith. If you're not able to accept that certain things you don't have access to understanding, then you'll never have full tawheed. And your knowledge will always be filled with doubt, and you'll never be able to build a full iman, because you are going after something that is not, you can't get it. People who pursue that which is impossible live miserably and die miserably. It's figuring out how to pursue the possible. Like, people who pursue the possible actually live very exciting lives. Like, very exciting lives, because their curiosity is driving them. But they have to know what is possible. What can they actually get? Like, if I decide today, you know what, I'm not happy with my life, I want to become an NBA player, right? I will spend the rest of my life miserable. I will live miserably and I'll die miserably, because I'll never do this. Not possible for me. And if someone who tells me it is possible for me, then they are a part of the problem on earth. Because you have to be, as a good friend, you have to say, look, it ain't in the books for you. This is not going to happen for you. Like, for many reasons, I'm happy to go through them for you if you are that blind not to see them yourself. But if you decide to pursue which is possible in life, then you actually live a healthy life, and it's filled with excitement and fulfillment, right? So he's pointing out here that if you decide that you want to know that which is impossible for you to know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has held back. You cannot know the essence of the divine. You cannot know that. It's impossible. I explained to you logically why it's impossible. If you know the essence of divinity or divineness, that means either it is not divine anymore, or you are. You can't have your cake and eat it too. It doesn't work both ways. So you will not have full tawheed. You can't have proper knowledge and you won't build a good iman. He will veer between unbelief and faith, confirmation and denial, acceptance and rejection for the rest of his life. Compulsive, disagreeable, doubtful, and deviant. He is not a true believer, nor a stubborn denier. He'll find himself like just confused and upset and doubtful. He can't become a good believer, nor can he just walk away from it either. And that's a difficult life to live. That's not what you were designed to live, and that's not what Islam wants for you. To live a life where you are absolutely always lost, upset, and confused, and just doubtful and deviant. No. Why? You just have to accept that there are, and the idea that there are things that we cannot know shouldn't be that much of a surprise to you. And if it is, then maybe that's what you need to spend some time thinking about, because I think it's dipped and bathed in a certain degree of arrogance that I am capable of knowing everything. No, you're not. Just like you're not capable of doing everything either. It doesn't mean that there's no room for us as a human race to improve everything about ourselves and everything about our lifestyles. It doesn't mean that you can't dream big and dream insanely big, but you have to be able to entertain or accept that there are limits, that we are limited to a certain degree. No limits at all. Yeah, I think that's where this is. It gets rooted. That Aqeeda is just telling you, okay, here's where the limit is. That's it. It's over here. You just can't understand the essence of divine and what his actions and attributes mean. All you can know is that they're not exactly what you are, but you can't understand their essence, at least not in dunya. It's beyond you. That's the line. That's the only line. What other line was ever drawn for you? And the future. And the future. And human beings are obsessed about arguing both these things. Human beings have been obsessed for thousands of years, and they have made zero progress. They have made no progress in understanding the divine more than they did back at the time of Nuh alayhi salam, nor have we ever figured out how to read the future. There's a lot of money in that if you want to quit your job and start your Arraf place, you'll make a lot of money. A lot of people superstitious, they'll come to you, they'll pay good money for you to tell them what they want to hear. We obviously have knowledge today to census and epidemiology, and we can talk about things in Bystray, but I'm talking about knowing with certainty every next step. So it's a really important verse to listen. ولا يصح الإيمان بالرؤية لأهل دار السلام لمن اعتبرها منهم بوهم أو تأولها بفهم إذ كان تأويل الرؤية وتأويل كل معنى يضاف إلى الربوبية ترك التأويل ولزوم التسليم وعليه دين المسلمين. So he says here, faith in the vision of the people of the abode or of peace, which is in the Jannah, which is he's talking about this again. He's bringing it back again. He's making a point here to kind of strengthen what he just talked about. So faith, accepting that people will see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Jannah, is not correct for those among them who express it as an illusion or who interpret it with their own limited understanding. Meaning, if you start talking about how it is that a human being is going to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you start saying, well, they won't really see him, they'll see an illusion, or you start interpreting seeing as in the heart seeing, you start making things up as you go along, like you start actually playing around. This is not interpret as the correct interpretation of the vision, and the interpretation of every meaning related to the Lordship of Allah is by abandoning interpretation and adhering to surrender. So he points out very clearly his way of going by things, that when the question is asked of how, you have to accept what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said. And you can't necessarily, and this piece, interestingly enough, where he kind of refuses ta'wil, is where the Ash'aris and Maturidis also refuse ta'wil. So this is not something that the schools of thought actually disagree upon. Meaning, those who accept ta'wil as one of the ways of dealing with actions or words that elude resemblance, they don't mean it here. Because in Jannah, we accept that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we can see Allah. All madhahib accept it. We don't understand how. Because the action of ourselves that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is stating we're going to be able to do Yawm al-Qiyamah, we don't need to interpret it in any way, because we know that in Jannah, you're not exactly the way you are here anyways. Like we know in Jannah that you are in a form that's a little bit different than it is here, which means you'll be able to function in a way that's different than you're functioning now, which means you don't need to actually interpret this at all. And this is something that Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah all together agree that you don't perform ta'wil. We don't perform ta'wil on the people of Jannah. See, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the people of Jannah see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so we accept that. And we accept that that sight will be truthful and real, and we don't know understand how, and we leave the interpretation of that until Yawm al-Qiyamah, when you, inshallah ta'ala, are blessed with the opportunity. And this is the religion of the Muslims, and this is agreed upon. ومن لم يتوقع النفي والتشبيه زل ولم يصب التنزيه فإن ربنا جل وعلا موصوف بصفات الوحدانية منعوت بنعوت الفردانية ليس في معناه أحد من البرية وتعالى عن الحدود والغايات والأركان والأعضاء والأدوات لا تحويه الجهات الست كسائر المبتدعات. So this is an important piece where he also explains aspects that I think are relevant to our day. He says, whoever does not guard himself from negating the attributes of Allah or likening Allah to something else has strayed and has not correctly understood the transcendence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning, if you are not focused on tanzih and nafi of tashbih, you will find yourself in the wrong position. You have to continuously in your life always exalt Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, negate the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from being with people or from people having their attributes of Allah. The moment you stop doing that, you will fall back into, you don't understand the actual transcendence of the Almighty. For our Lord Almighty subhanahu wa ta'ala is described with the attributes of oneness, qualified with the qualities of uniqueness, does not have the characteristics of any other creature. He is exalted above any limits, above any ends, supports, limbs, or tools. Meaning we don't describe him with any of these things. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says hand, it's not a limb. For me, it is. For me, a hand is a limb, not for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's an organ, it's not an organ for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you exalt him from limits or ends. Where does he start? Where does he end? No limits, no ends, no supports, no limbs, no tools. Right? He is not contained by the 6 directions. Right? Up, down, forward, back, right, left, the 6 directions. He is not contained in space. He's not contained by these directions. When he says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if his sama is above us, is in the sky. And I didn't talk about this in this course. This is for the second level course, because this is a very long khilaf that I want you to be more, to have a good foundation of Aqeeda before we go into it, because it's an ongoing problem that it seems to me from where I'm standing that it's not going to end for another couple of 100 years before we kind of stop arguing it. But he says here very clearly, Imam Tahawi, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not contained by the 6 directions. You can't say that he is in a space, up or above or down or yes, left or right. The jihad to sit, the 6 directions do not contain him subhanahu wa ta'ala, as the rest of things are. Everything else that you can describe is that is physical will be, you can describe him in terms of the 6 directions. You can put him into a cube of some sort. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala you cannot do that with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which makes sense. وَالْمِعْرَاجُ حَقٌّ وقد أسري بالنبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم وعرج بشخصه في اليقظة إلى السماء ثم إلى حيث شاء الله من العلا وأكرمه الله بما شاء وأوحى إليه ما أوحى ما كذب الفؤاد ما رأى فصلى الله عليه وآله وسلم في الآخرة والأولى. And he speaks about the Prophet ﷺ here for a moment. He talks about the Mi'raj, and he didn't go into detail of this. We'll do it again, second level, inshallah, we'll do that. So the ascension to heaven is true. The Prophet, peace be upon him, was taken by night and ascended in person during his wakefulness to the heavens, and then to whichever heights Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed for him. Allah honored him as he willed, and he revealed to him what he revealed. His heart was not mistaken about what he saw, alayhi salatu wasalam. Allah blessed him and granted him peace in the hereafter and in this world, alayhi salatu wasalam. This is an issue of, there is some difference of opinion on this issue, but the majority of scholars of Ahl-Sunnah wal-Jama'ah, the majority of them from all 3 schools of thought, that the Prophet ﷺ's Mi'raj, ascendance, happened in person. It wasn't just his spirit that went, it was all of him ﷺ that went. And of course, if Allah's ala kulli shay'in qadir, so you have no problem with this. If you accept Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then this is not something that you'll struggle with at all. طيب. From 50 to 61, the points, he talks about the Prophet's basin, the Prophet's intercession, Yawm al-Qiyamah. These are things that are part of Aqeeda to a certain degree, not as centrally. So I talk about them in these courses in a second level, but they are here. The covenant Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took from humanity in the Quran, further explanation of Allah's knowledge, concepts related to predestination, to Qada and Qadr. So he talks about Qada and Qadr in these verses. Deeds are judged by how one's life ends. So he talks about husn al-khitam. Again, you can see these issues are these fully i'tiqad. He sees them to be. Tahawi sees these issues to be, faith, creed based, not just fiqh and tazkiyah. No, he cares for it. Like knowing your khitam and caring about your khitam is a part of your aqeedah. SubhanAllah, you can study any book of modern aqeedah. They don't talk about Hasl khitam because how do you categorize it? Right? It's not categorized under theology. It's not a part of belief in Allah or His malaika or His kutub or His rasul or qada and qadar or anything or a part of. So they don't talk about it, but he does, and that's why I love these texts because he brings in the pieces that your aqeedah should lead to. Your aqeedah should help you carry, as a Muslim. And I find it quite refreshing. And then he talks about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should not be questioned, the types of knowledge of the human beings. And this is that last piece is what I want you to make sure you memorize. So if you don't get to it today, please read it. Keep on going and read verse 61 in preparation for next week. والحوض الذي أكرمه الله تعالى به غياثا لأمته حق والشفاعة التي ادخرها لهم حق كما روي في الأخبار والميثاق الذي أخذه الله تعالى من آدم وذريته حق. So he's talking about things that are agreed upon within our deen. The fountain of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, where Allah will nourish His nation, and Allah honored the Prophet ﷺ with his haqq is true. The intercession, the shafa'ah of the Prophet ﷺ that he will hold, that he has held on to ﷺ until the day of resurrection, until the day of judgment, is true, as related to us in the narrations of the Prophet ﷺ. And the covenant that Allah Almighty took from Adam and his progeny is true. أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ قَالُوا بَلَى. The ayah in Surah Al-A'raf that Allah took that covenant from creation that He is our Lord. That a part of us will always remind us of Him, even if we decide at some point to turn our backs on it. We'll stop at that, inshallah ta'ala. We'll continue for 10 minutes after Salat al-Maghrib, if that's all right. Just because I want to finish this course. We only got 40 minutes out of this. So 10 minutes after Salat al-Maghrib, I'll just go into just for 10 minutes after Maghrib, just so we can conclude the course next week. And then the week after can be a Q&A, because I want to give you a Q&A session before the end of the course. So we'll come back, inshallah, right after Salat al-Maghrib, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. So someone make that for us? Make that for us. We'll continue with a few more verses of the matan, maybe for the next just 10 minutes or so. Then we'll let you go, inshallah ta'ala, afterwards. My goal is obviously just to make sure that I do get last year I did this. I didn't get the opportunity to put in a Q&A session. Because we ran into the same problem. I run it every year at the same time, so we ran into the same problem. We're just going to go take 10 minutes and I'll let you guys go, inshallah. All right. So يكمل رحمه الله نفعنا بعلمه. Continues, he says, وقد علم الله تعالى فيما لم يزل عدد من يدخل الجنة وعدد من يدخل النار جملة واحدة فلا يزاد في ذلك العدد ولا ينقص منه وكذلك أفعالهم فيما علم منهم أن يفعلوه وكل ميسر لما خلق له والأعمال بالخواتيم. So here he starts talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge as an intro to kind of talking about qada and qadr. And we've talked about all these topics, but I'll just recite them for you so that you get a sense of what he's saying. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Almighty has always known the number of those who Yawm al-Qiyamah will enter Jannat al-Na'im and those who will enter the hellfire as a single allocation. He just knows everyone, where they're going. That number will never increase or decrease. This is his ilm, subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is knowledge. And if this confuses you, then go back to the sessions where we talked about in depth Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge. This is fi al-kitab. This is fi lawh al-mahfuz. Fi lawh al-mahfuz is where he documented his knowledge, and no one has seen lawh al-mahfuz. al-kitab is where things are written based on whatever people were offered in their lives. And this changes based on your qadr, based on what you do and the decisions that you make and the changes that you apply within your life, and your destiny will change based on that as well. But al-lawh al-mahfuz, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's infinite or divine knowledge exists, where He knows exactly who is going where and how many of them. And this is something that, because His knowledge, He knows all, and none of that changes. وَكَذَلِكَ أَفْعَالُهُم. Likewise, all of their actions. He knows amongst them who will do what. And we talked about this in some degree of depth, so I'm not going to go repeat it all. وَكُلٌّ مُيَسَّرٌ لِمَا خُلِقَ لَهُ. Everyone is facilitated for that which he is created for. Meaning, you were created for ta'ah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for making it to Jannah, to being someone. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will facilitate for you within your life that which you were destined to be and to do. Like the callings of your life, you will be destined for. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ease you towards fulfilling the callings that you have in your life. And that's what he means by this, rahmatullah alayhi. And that's what the Prophet ﷺ meant by saying this. Doesn't mean that you are destined for nar, so that's going to be facilitated for you in Jannah, the opposite. But rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has his destiny for every living human being is to do well, is to get closer to him. And that's what he wants from them. So he will facilitate that for you in whatever form that is suiting for you within your life. And deeds are judged as they are at the end of life. This is an aspect, maybe not of central i'tiqad, but it is to a certain degree. We talk about al-khawatim, the ends of life. It's a part of our creed, I guess, to a certain degree. I don't talk about it in this first level. I do talk about it in the second level of theology, because I think there's a certain degree of importance to it, of understanding why it's important, of how things end, right? We know that in life, even without being told this specifically, we kind of know that. Marriages are not judged by the wedding day, but how it ended. Right? The relationship that you have with your child is not judged by how he was with him, how you were with him when he was 2 or 3, running around, carrying, laughing, is how when you pass away or he does, what it was based on. So in life in general, we know that things are judged by how they turn out eventually. What is the last? How did it end up at the end? So if you mess things up at the beginning, but you figure them out at the end, then inshallah as well. If you do things well at the beginning, but then you mess them up at the end, the story is not complete. It's ruined. It's not a good story. So, which is why this is an important part of understanding life and dealing with life in general, our lives as people and our relationships as well. Especially with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Specifically, this becomes of extreme importance. With Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you pass away. Right? It's like your life is just the story of your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you mess up at the beginning, fine, but make sure at the end it's good, it's clear, it's done well. You have the proper understandings, the proper responses, the proper behaviors, because that will make up for a bad beginning. But if you had a great beginning, but at the end of it was all a mess, in life, sometimes with other relationships, sometimes it can still make it, but for sure not with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So al-a'mal bil khawatim. And we'll talk about this in a second level, inshallah. So he continues. قال والسعيد من سعد بقضاء الله والشقي من شقي بقضاء الله. وأصل القدر سر الله تعالى في خلقه لم يطلع على ذلك ملك مقرب ولا نبي مرسل والتعمق والنظر في ذلك ذريعة الخذلان وسلم الحرمان ودرجة الطغيان فالحذر كل الحذر من ذلك نظرا وفكرا ووسوسة فإن الله تعالى طوى علم القدر عن أنامه ونهاهم عن مرامه كما قال تعالى في كتابه لا يسأل عما يفعل وهم يسألون فمن سأل لما فعل فقد رد حكم الكتاب ومن رد حكم الكتاب كان من الكافرين. So I'll talk about this and then we'll let you go inshallah, but I wanted to make sure that we at least brought this up. He talks a little bit about qada and qadar here. Now, like I said, for most scholars, at least at the early stage, qada and qadar were used interchangeably. I break them down for you as 2 things just to make it easier to understand them so that you can categorize them better in your brain. But the scholars always use qada and qadar as just one thing and just categorize the way I explained it without naming things, like without giving specific names, just saying that this can happen and this can happen without names. I'm calling certain things qada and things in qadar just to make it easier. But they didn't use that terminology, at least not at in the early stages of theological study. And this is it's 1,000 years old, so he didn't use that. So just be careful as you listen to it that he doesn't use that exact same terminology. So he says, those who are blessed or sa'id, those who are going to be called as happy or in a good position, are the ones who are blessed by the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And those who are damned, or those who are going to be in bad shape yawm al-qiyamah, are the ones who are going to have that by the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's just explaining, as we've talked about, that everything happens under Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decree. Nothing escapes his decree. Nothing happens against his will subhanahu wa ta'ala or beyond what his will or decree or qada and qadar. And that is just a very clear and simple concept that we've talked about in some degree of depth in this course. And the basis of providence, or the basis of qadr, or predestination, is that it is a secret of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His creation. It's something that you don't know. You'll never know exactly what is muqaddar lak, and what's waiting for you around the corner, what's in your future, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set up for you in your life. This is a sir. You're not going to know this. There's no way to actually know this, so there's no point of you wasting time trying to figure that out. It has not been shown to an angel near to him, nor to a prophet he sent. This is not knowledge that he has offered anyone access to. No one's sitting around knowing what's coming your way. No one does. So if you accept that and you're able to wrap your head around that, it makes your life easier to live. That is just, there's no point in worrying about it. There's no point in trying to control it. There's no point in trying to figure out what it's what's going to be is going to be. Just make sure that you are able to understand what's happening to you, interpret it correctly, respond to it correctly, and make choices that are appropriate based on what's going to happen, but you don't necessarily have the ability to change. And then he points this out. He says, and subhanAllah, it's interesting that, and even back then, it's the same questions, wallah. The human race have the exact same, nothing has changed. He says, delving and investigating deeply and spending a lot of time trying to figure out this piece. Into that causes a loss, a ladder to deprivation, and decree of transgression. Meaning it will only deprive you of enjoying and functioning your life more, and it will only push you towards transgressing against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning either you end up making a decision that I have no control over anything, so you stop doing anything, you use qada and qadr as an excuse for passivity, or you end up denying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's divine knowledge and qada and qadr, and you have kufr in Allah altogether. So the more you go into this, the less you're going to figure it out. You have to be able to point out, take a step and say, I'm not going to understand all of this. I can't, there's too many variables I don't know. No one does. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's a part of what Yawm al-Qiyamah is. All of it will be laid out for you to see. Here's what happened. Here's what could have happened. And then you just, why? فَالْحَذَرَ كُلِّ الْحَذَرَ. So he says, rahmatullah alayhi, take extreme caution. And he's warning you from that type of investigation, thinking, and insinuation. For Allah Almighty has hidden the knowledge of providence from His creations or creatures, and has prohibited them from seeking it. As said by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, He will not be questioned about what He does, but they, the human beings, will be questioned about what they did. Whoever asks why he did something or has rejected the judgment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's book, and whoever rejects the judgment of the book is amongst the unbelievers. So here he points out the piece that we all need to kind of remind ourselves of. What all of this investigation that is useless takes you to. It takes you to a point where you start questioning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You start saying, why did He do this? Why did He let this happen? Why is He? And that is an act of kufr. That's an act of kufr. Almost everything you learn in Aqeeda, or you will ever learn in Aqeeda, the goal of it, for me at least, is to make sure that you don't come to a point of that sense in your life. Because the preparation that Islam is supposed to offer you is that when you are hit with the big rock, when you fall, when you fall and you slam your face, and when you lose, that you will still carry yourself with grace. You will still show the hamd to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the sabr, that you still accept Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decree, as rough or difficult as it may be at the moment, right? As brutal as it may seem to you at that given, you still have that. If you turn and you start questioning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you don't get to do that. You don't get to question the Almighty. You're going to be questioned. Don't turn this around. Don't turn this around. You're living so that you're going to be questioned about what you did with your life. This is a free gift that is absolutely priceless that you were offered. A free gift. You did nothing to deserve this. You have no claim over being alive and having a consciousness and having intellect. You're granted this free ride, and you're going to be asked about how you use it, because it's a very precious thing. The most precious thing in existence is the gift of life. Is being alive, because dead things don't have an experience of any sort. Is having that gift of feeling, of being here, of being an essence of some sort, of having a consciousness of some sort. This was given to you. With you have nothing. You can't pay for this. You can't, even if you wanted to. Even if we all came together and said, we want to pay you back for this, we have nothing to offer Him. So it's an impossible equation. He gave you something that is absolutely priceless, and you do not possess, despite your best efforts, anything to pay Him back. So the payback is the questioning of what you did with it. So don't turn this around ever. Aqeeda is to make sure that you don't turn this around, or you start questioning Him. because you're looking into qadr and qada from the wrong angle, or you're spending too much time insinuating over an aspect of what you lack knowledge of, to the point where you can't look at life appropriately anymore. And you start questioning him, when really the question is not for him, it's for us. And that's what he points out here, rahmatullah alayhi. It's a very, very, I'd advise that this slide is worth reading again, just to think about in some degree of depth, because he talks about something here that's very important. I talked about it a little bit during the course, but I didn't go into full depth. I want you to, at least at the beginning, within this first level, to understand what qada and qadar is and how to deal with them, in generally speaking. There are a few more steps that can be taken. فهذا جملة ما يحتاج إليه من هو منور قلبه من أولياء الله تعالى وهي درجة الراسخين في العلم. This is the summary of what is needed by those who have enlightened hearts among the allies of Allah. It is the degree of the rooted in knowledge. I mean, knowing this is all you need to know. I'm going to stop there, because the next verse moving forward, we go into something that I want to make sure we take enough time to talk about. It's very important. Read the next verse on your own. Try to memorize it if you don't mind, before I see you next time, so we can go into it. And we'll conclude, inshallah ta'ala, the metin next week. Subhanallahi bihamdik, shalla la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Jazakumullahu khair wa barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.